sure I get this edited right. So let's do the DOS segments of the day. DOS, 2 days, and it is garbage propaganda as usual, but stay vigilant, right? So, we will stay vigilant. We will keep doing this until they stop lying, which will never happen. Alright, so we're on the 31st. We're starting at the 7-minute mark.
Can I ask you one other aspect of the conflict? I know you've said before you're not going to give commentary on every strike, but there's quite a prominent one at the Jabalia refugee camp today. Israel said it killed a Hamas commander, but the health ministry in Gaza saying over 50 people were killed. Do you have a take on this and about the civilian, what appears to be a heavy civilian toll there?
Again, I'm not going to offer commentary on every strike. We're just not in a position to do so from a podium here without information that we have verified on our own.
Again, this is the double standard where they will not verify they need to verify every single strike because every strike has an individual possibility. Where every strike from Russia is a war crime, every strike from Israel needs to be looked at individually because they really need to do the research before they call anything not a legitimate strike because they're trying to take out Hamas, right?
I would just reiterate what I have said before, which is, of course, Israel has the right to defend itself. We have talked with them about that right, and we've talked about it publicly. But as we have said publicly and have also communicated privately to them, they also have the burden and the responsibility to exercise that self-defense in a way that minimizes civilian harm.
Can I follow up on that? Have you laid down any red lines for Israel, though? Is it justifiable enough that there is a Hamas commander purportedly in this refugee camp that would then kill scores of civilians? Is that acceptable to the US?
Again, I don't want to speak to the circumstances on the ground when we've not been able to verify them for ourselves at this point of a strike that just happened. I don't think it would be appropriate for me to do so. What we have communicated to them is the exact same thing we've said publicly, which is we think that it is important that they conduct their operations in a way that minimizes civilian harm. Secretary spoke to this, I thought, quite clearly on the Hill today when he said that we see the significant loss of civilian lives. He's personally affected by the loss of civilian lives, whether they be Palestinian or whether they be Israeli, and it's why we will continue to make clear that we expect the Israel government to operate in a way that protects civilian lives.
But if the IDF says, "Oh, there was a Hamas commander here, there was a Hamas commander there," is that sufficient?
I'm not going to get into hypotheticals or I don't have the ability to comment on each individual strike.
And is there any progress on the safe zones for civilians that were supposed to be stood up?
It's again an area that we continue to work through with. That Ambassador Satterfield works on with the government of Israel, with the United Nations, with other partners in the region about what is the best way to protect the civilians who are inside Gaza. I promise Tracy can use.
Thank you. The Secretary also spoke, I know you don't want to comment on individual strikes, but the Secretary also spoke about how civilian casualties will inflame the Arab world. And so given that that's already happening now with this strike this morning, which was pretty big, is Israel really doing enough to avoid civilians?
Let me refer you to a piece by the Secretary that just published in the Washington Post, I think a half an hour before I came out here, where he talks about the need to minimize civilian harm and the need to get humanitarian assistance in. And this goes to the first part of your question. One of the cases he makes in that piece is that protecting civilians from harm and getting humanitarian assistance into civilians isn't just the morally right thing to do. Of course it is, and that's enough reason to do it on its own. But it is also the best thing to do for Israel's security. It is the best thing to do that we can do, that Israel can do to prevent the conflict from widening, to prevent other actors from coming in, along with our.
They keep claiming like they're preventing other actors from coming in. What about the fact that Israel has bombed other people? Like if anybody intervenes, we will step in, but they're not allowed to protect themselves because the bombing has expanded into 3 different other nations. But yeah, if they step in, and then America will have to intervene. Like Jesus, the hypocrisy in this stuff is so thick. This guy is a devil tool.
deterrence measures that we will continue to enforce. So we will continue to make that case to the Israelis publicly, just as we have privately.
Okay, and following on the trucks, the Secretary also said this morning that as far as they know, as far as you all know with the inspections that they and Israel are doing, no spillover, whatever they call it, spillage has gone to Hamas as far as you can tell to this point. But there are also reports that Israel has blocked a fair number of those trucks from going in. Trucks arrive to be inspected and move into Gaza, and Israel saying no to quite a number of them. Is that true? Can you confirm that? And if so, why? What is Israel finding that they don't want going in? And how big a problem is
I
that?
can't confirm that, actually. I wasn't aware of that. I haven't seen reports of them rejecting, but it certainly may well be true. They have an inspection regime that they have stood up to verify that only humanitarian assistance is going in. They're tracking that very closely. But it's an inspection process that they are running, not that we are running. But then, as the Secretary said, no, we have not yet seen any diversion of humanitarian assistance once it's gotten into Gaza, but it's an issue we're concerned about. It's an issue the Israeli government is very much concerned about, so we'll continue to monitor it.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
On the aid trucks into Gaza, the Secretary said today in testimony, right now we're up to almost 60 trucks. We're trying to get to 100 this week. That is the bare minimum of what's needed. I guess if the bare minimum is not yet being reached by the U.S., why is the Secretary asking for more aid at all, whether it's however much of a portion of $9.5 billion is going to Gaza?
Because we are trying to ramp up the ability to get more and more assistance into the civilians in Gaza who are caught in this conflict through no fault of their own and are suffering the consequences of this conflict through no fault of their own. So we're going to do two things. One, work with Congress to get more.
So he does recognize that Palestinians are dying to no fault of their own and need aid on no fault of their own. They just don't know how to frame the conflict. You can recognize that you've been called out so many times and double checked so many times. You have to recognize that, but you still can't call the conflict the way it is. That's man, he's getting beaten into submission in his verbiage here. He's losing.
More humanitarian assistance approved from the United States government because we believe, as I said, it's not just the morally right thing to do, but it's also something that is in the best interest of Israel's long-term security. And we're going to keep working on a diplomatic basis to try to open Rafah Gate and work with the Egyptian government, the Israeli government, the United Nations to get as much humanitarian assistance flowing in. A lot of that humanitarian assistance is coming, as I said, to I think Matt's question, from other countries in the region and from international relief organizations, not necessarily from the United States.
One more question, if you don't mind. Senator Chuck Grassley has written to the Secretary a few times about Fritz Berger, a State Department employee, accusing him of maintaining a publicly available blog that includes a lot of anti-Semitic content. He called the Jewish people the devil's children recently. So your state has confirmed to us that he is still an employee. Has he faced any disciplinary action?
So because of privacy restrictions that apply to every federal employee, I'm unable to talk about any individual employee's employment file and employment status here at the State Department. I will say, of course, as a general rule, we oppose anti-Semitism in any form. The Secretary has spoken to this quite publicly. Our special envoy to oppose anti-Semitism has spoken about this on a number of occasions, and we will continue to work to root it out around the world, just as we try to root it out here at home. But I, unfortunately, because of privacy reasons and federal statutes, can't speak to an individual employee's case.
Just to move on to, back to...
Yeah, let's bring it back to the subject since she was obviously a plant there to lead it in a direction they wanted and trying to bring the conversation back to the direction they want. Let's get back to somebody who actually has some integrity.
Something that the Secretary addressed during his testimony today. He talked about what the situation in Gaza might be like the day after this war, the current conflict sort of ends. There's a preference, I guess, from the Secretary's point of view for some kind of revived Palestinian Authority. Could you talk a bit more about what discussions you're having? Are there talks with the current Palestinian Authority to see if they are willing to do that? Do you think that's a feasible thing to have, an authority, even if they are Palestinians, to be kind of imposed by Israel after a military operation? Do you think that would be accepted among people in Gaza?
So I don't want to get into what the future may hold, and I don't want to get into any details. I think it'd be premature to do at this point. I will say we have had very preliminary talks about what the future of Gaza might look like. The Secretary started those conversations in his trip to the region just in the aftermath of the October 7th attacks. And we have continued those talks at the Assistant Secretary level, and the Secretary has raised it at time in calls with his counterparts. And I expect that it will be the subject of a good bit of diplomatic engagement moving forward. I don't have any announcements to make about that at this time, but a couple things are clear to us. Number one, Israel cannot occupy Gaza. They have said that they don't want to occupy Gaza, and we expect them not to occupy Gaza. Number two, Hamas cannot continue to.
Write that one down. Halloween. Israel will not occupy Gaza. U.S. will not let them. Israel says they don't want to. This will never happen. Write that one down. Halloween 2023, Matt Miller lies and says Israel doesn't want to occupy Gaza. USA does not want them to occupy Gaza. Nobody wants them to occupy Gaza. Israel doesn't even want to think about Gaza. Remember that. That is some Halloween-esque bullshit right there.
Govern Gaza. So that leaves you the question of what comes next, and we are going to be actively engaged in trying to answer that question and answer it in conjunction with counterparts in the region. But I wouldn't want to get ahead of that process to try to forecast what it might ultimately look like.
Don't want to say what it's going to look like, but it's not going to. Israel's not going to occupy it. They don't want to occupy it. The USA doesn't want them to occupy it. That's not going to happen. I mean, I guess they're also attacking the West Bank. So maybe they'll just give Israel the West Bank and give Gaza to somebody else, like the USA military. Maybe that's what they're planning on. Ugh, that was a scary prediction. Sorry about that. That's ugh.
The people of Gaza have a say in that?
Of course they would. Our end goal is always the establishment of a two-state solution where the Palestinian people have a voice in their own future. That is our policy. It has been the policy from the beginning of this administration, and that is ultimately our policy with respect to the people of Gaza and the people of the West Bank.
And in terms of the other countries who might help out with that, who are you talking to? Who can we say?
I don't think I should get into any further details at this point. We'll keep it confidential. Yeah.
Just very quickly, obviously the Secretary speaking for the United States, but do you think the Israelis are on board with this? The idea of having the Palestinian Authority, which many people in Netanyahu's government haven't actually been very fond of taking control.
I think I should let the Israelis speak to what they will or will not support, but they have been very clear that they do not expect to occupy Gaza, and the president has made clear that he expects that Israel will not occupy Gaza. So it is a conversation that we will have to have with the government of Israel and with other partners of the region of what the actual administrative authority will be, as well as a conversation we have to have with the people of Gaza going forward.
Matt, on this, and I have a couple of questions too. The EU is considering sending a mission.
Oh, yeah, they're gonna sidetrack for a little bit. That was the only line for Halloween, but I thought that was a pretty good one. Israel will never occupy Gaza. The USA doesn't want them to occupy Gaza. This will never happen. As you can hear Rick and Morty explosions in the background, that is the kind of chaos they're trying to bring to you. All right, I think we're starting at minute 9, going to 17 for the first. So minute 9 to 17. Here we go. November 1st. Take one.
Who is administrating the exit from Gaza? Is it Hamas? Is there a third party who's
There is
allowing
not a third party. I believe it is the authorities in Gaza that were existing, running the crossing before October 7th.
So it's kind of a return to the status quo?
I wouldn't call anything like I wouldn't call it a return to the status quo in that the process is very different. But ultimately, it's the authorities that, with respect to.
So he's going to keep saying it's the authorities that were controlling it before. He can't say it was Hamas because Hamas is the controlling government, but he keeps saying it's the authorities that were controlling it before. Like sidetracking. Who was controlling it before?
To the authorities that are administering the gate on the Gaza side and the Egyptian side, it is a return to how they were operating before October 7th.
And then when exactly did this deal actually get reached?
That is a hard question to answer because it is something we have been working on continuously for a number of weeks. There have been a number of false starts along the way. There have been times when we thought we were going to be able to get American citizens out, and ultimately those efforts fell through. It's been extremely complicated when you think of the number of partners we're dealing with here. But ultimately, we got to the point where we were able to feel confident that we could get American citizens out really in the past 24 hours. I will tell you, I came out yesterday to the briefing and talked a little bit about what we expected to happen without being able to give any details, and it was just in the last hour before I came out that I really felt comfortable even saying that.
And then you said the U.S. supported allowing injured Palestinians to leave via Rafah.
It's not that the U.S. is. We don't have any.
No, but you said you supported
you
that
support,
move.
Yeah,
Did
correct.
a party oppose that move?
Not that I'm aware of, no. Go ahead.
Matt, I have a couple of things. On Secretary's travel to Israel, can you say what is his primary objective? And one thing specifically, as the civilian death toll rises, is the United States going to push Israel more to show restraint.
You can guess that he doesn't say anything here. That's just kind of assumed. Not expected, but she is the beginning of good questions and his fake answers. And they would quickly move to the good stuff. 11:20 is where I got it. So here we go, where I wanted us to kick off next.
Our expectation that in conducting this military campaign, that they do so in full compliance with international humanitarian law and the laws of war, and we will be very direct about that.
There's been back and forth in this briefing room about this, but given there was a big attack yesterday on the refugee camp, I have to ask again, what is the U.S. assessment so far in terms of whether Israel is following the rules of war?
Again, I will say that I'm not able to offer an assessment on that strike, as I'm not able to offer assessment on other individual strikes. What I will say is that we will continue to discuss with them directly, as we will say publicly, that it is our expectation that in all of their activities, all of their military campaigns, that they comply with the laws of war.
I mean, in terms of yesterday's attack, there are various commentators, some countries, international human rights lawyers, some of them are calling it war crimes. And we know that in this building, when you're making these kinds of legal determinations, there is a process for that. Has there been any thinking of starting such a process for Israel's actions in this war?
It is not an assessment that we are making now, no.
Thank you. Actually, follow up on both Olivia and Humaira. On Humaira's first. I mean, this area was struck today again. Now, why wouldn't you condemn the killing of dozens of civilians, like 300, maybe less, we don't know, to kill one person? Because that's what the Israeli spokesman said. So he said we went after one militant. Why wouldn't you do that?
So I will say that we are deeply saddened by the loss of civilian life.
Didn't ask if you were sad about it. Asked why wouldn't you say, like, why won't we say something? Why won't we stop something? They literally confessed to one actual target in a 200 to 300 person kill bombing. There was one target. They admitted it. Straight up spokesman admitted it. Why? He's not asking if you're sad. That's not what he's asking. Don't say you're sad right away. That's a deflection. Don't deflect. Answer the question.
Whatever the number of lost civilians in this strike or any other strike, we are obviously troubled and deeply saddened by every loss of life. And that's true whether it be Palestinians, whether it be Israelis, and we will continue to make that clear, and we'll make it clear to the Israeli government.
Right. Well, that's okay, but 21 years ago, Ari Fleischer came out and condemned a similar act. The George W. Bush administration condemned an act at the time where Israel killed one Hamas leader, Salah Hadi, and killed 15 others, which is a lot less than what we have seen in the last couple of days. And they condemned it very strongly. So why wouldn't your administration do the same thing?
So I'm not able to speak to whatever assessments an administration 20 years ago has made. I will say that we will continue to impress directly upon our Israeli counterparts the need to minimize civilian harm in all of their military activities.
All right. To follow up on Olivia on what the Secretary said yesterday about they're looking beyond what comes next after Hamas is completely destroyed and so on. What kind of system you would have in place in Gaza, and he suggested that you are in talks with a group of governments. Would that include all the Arab governments? Would that include Israel and Saudi Arabia or Egypt and Jordan? What does that include?
So I don't want to get into any details. As the Secretary said, we have begun to have initial conversations about it. I do want to make one thing clear, which is the future of Palestinian leadership is ultimately a question for the Palestinian people. We have been thinking.
I think your actions speak very loudly that that's just simply not true. You guys do not feel that the Palestinians have control of their future. I think the American government has very loudly said that that is not true. So whatever you say next is going to be a lie since you just lied. Thank you, though. Thank you so much.
Through and discussing with our partners in the region different post-conflict scenarios, but I'm not able to get into any of those sort of details at this point.
So let me just, my last question on the internet. The internet and communications have been cut again. Do you have any comment on that? Because you urged the Israelis last weekend to have connectivity again. So are you urging them today to do the same thing?
The internet was cut. It was restored. I will say that we have made clear that we think internet access is important. I just started this briefing by noting that we are going to send emails to American citizens about how to get out of Gaza. We think it's important, obviously, that they be able to have access to those emails. So at times, Israel may need to take operational steps that they have judged they need to take, but I will say as a general principle, it is the position of the U.S. government that internet access needs to remain viable for the people of Gaza.
Can I just follow up on Humara's question earlier when she asked you about whether there was any discussion in the legal NL, the legal bureau about what Israel is doing and whether it's and whether it complies with the rules of war, and you said no. So I'm just wondering why not?
It's not an assessment that we have made at this point. You saw the secretary.
I know, but she didn't ask if you had made an assessment. She asked if it was being discussed and considered, if there were people looking at this
Let me say
to
that
make to eventually make a determination. And it's now been, we're 3 weeks in, basically, into this. You have made similar determinations, roughly in that space of time. So I'm just wondering, you're saying that that's not even being discussed.
No, let me.
You're saying that's not even being discussed. That's not even part of the equation. They can make these decisions on Russia in a moment. They can make these decisions on other situations, other wars. We can make these instantly. But we are going to take our time. We're going to do due diligence. And we're going to make sure Israel gets the proper the proper vetting on anything that happens, because we don't want to accuse them of any war crimes or anything, really. No accusing Israel of anything at all. No foul play.
Let me be clear. I'm not going to get into internal discussions, internal deliberations at the State Department. I'll speak to the assessments that we have made. We have not made an assessment of war crimes in this situation.
No
I should have been clear. We have not made any type of assessment at this time. As the Secretary made clear, there will be an opportunity for that. We're not in the position at this point to judge all the strikes. What we think is important is to continue to impress upon the Israeli.
We're not in the situation to judge all the strikes. Again, we can judge all the strikes for Russia. We can judge all the strikes for Yemen. We can judge all the strikes. Any other situation, if it's against our narrative, we can judge them with just an overarching umbrella. But if it's within our allies, then we have to judge them very critically, very quietly, very closely, and hopefully after everybody has already kind of forgotten about it and we can just push it under the rug, because we're not actually going to accuse Israel of anything ever. We're going to hope 10 years from now that this will just be swept under the rug and they'll never actually get to the courts. That's the real goal here.
The government, the importance of minimizing civilian harm.
But you guys have made a determination. We had this discussion with Simon the other day about Russia and actually committing war crimes, where you made a legal determination. In this case, you're not even willing to say that that's something that's being talked about?
I will say, in the case of Russia, we were able to assess with a very high degree of confidence that Russia was deliberately
not even willing to talk about it, and he's going to go off like Russia is fucking Dr. Evil, and we are freaking, and we're the Mountie police. I don't even know. Like, fuck you, dude. His lies here are ridiculous.
Targeting civilians. I remember that
yes,
it came after that assessment came after Bucha, when there were clear evidence of deliberate killing and targeting civilians.
It had to be considered by the lawyers. And what your response to Humera was, unless you're saying it was now wrong, or that you misspoke, was that it's not even being discussed. It's not. People are not even looking at it.
What I'm saying is, I'm not going to get into internal discussions, internal deliberations. It is not an assessment that we have made, and as the Secretary has said, there will be time to make those judgments. Saeed, were you? I think you got. Were you done? Or
I'm done.
Okay. See, a minute ago you were interrupting me. Now I come back for more, and you're not.
And that arrogant. Look at this freaking. There's a perfect place for his stupid face. A minute ago you were bouncing off the walls, and now you don't have anything left. Oh, because you don't answer anything. You just piss us off. That's what you do. That's what you brought us all down to. Was your level. And your level is horrible. We don't like being at your level. And in 2 days, 2 50-minute press second, that's all you gave us. All you gave us was 8 minutes worth of lies that were worth watching again. So disappointing. All right. I think I'm going to cut that from my clip for YouTube, so give myself a little spot here so I know where to clip it at. Ah, you must clip it. Clip it good. All right. Now we will do the rest of our White House lies for the night. And here we go. Blinken, what do you got to say? In Israel. Holds a
Days after
in Israel.
Hamas's attack on October 7th, I came to Israel, followed soon thereafter by President Biden, to make clear that as long as the United States stands, Israel will never stand alone. Today, in my 4th visit to Israel since October 7th, I reiterate that in all my discussions with Prime Minister Netanyahu, President Herzog, the Security Cabinet. I reiterated and made clear our support for Israel's right to defend itself, indeed its obligation to defend itself. That includes through the additional assistance that we work with Congress.
That that becomes such a knee-jerk thing for them to say. They don't even think about it
And
anymore.
we're working with Congress now to provide for Israel's defense, as well as for urgent humanitarian needs in Gaza. This right to self-defense, indeed this obligation to self-defense, belongs to every nation.
Again,
No country
every
could
time.
or should tolerate the slaughter of innocents. You've heard me speak to some of the stories that Israelis have experienced on October 7th. Today, we saw additional images, additional footage collected by the Israeli government from video cameras, some the terrorists' own, others in communities that were attacked. It remains almost beyond the human capacity to process, to digest. I saw, for example, a family on a kibbutz, a father, two young boys, maybe 10, 11 years old, grabbing them, pulling them out of their living room, going through their very small backyard and into a shelter, followed seconds later by a terrorist who throws a grenade into that small shelter. And then as the father comes staggering out, shoots him down. And then the boys come out and they run into their house. And the camera in the house is filming everything. And they're crying. "Where's daddy?" One says. The other says, "They killed daddy. Where's my mommy?" And then the terrorist comes in and casually opens the refrigerator and starts to eat from it. That's what we're dealing with. And it is striking.
This is all gonna be one-sided, of course, because he's having this in Tel Aviv. And this is all about one day, October 7th. We're not gonna talk about the 8,000 civilians killed since then, the 3,000 children killed since then, the bombing of civilians that America not only funds, but fucking gives them the weapons for. He's not gonna talk about that with such emotion, like he's talking about this, that he's putting all this fake fucking emotion into. Oh, it's a sad story, but dude, like, you're only gonna tell one side of the story ever.
And in some ways shocking that the brutality of the slaughter has receded so quickly in the memories of so many. But not in Israel, and not in America. 35 Americans were murdered that day as well, and more than 200 foreign nationals from 35 countries. I've returned to the region to engage in intense diplomacy with our partners to try to help ensure that an attack like October 7th never happens again. And in doing so, that we forge a different future, a very different future for Israelis and Palestinians alike. That out of this tragedy emerges a better tomorrow for both peoples and for the region. There are a number of important steps that we can, indeed we must take now to help make that possible. First, we need to continue to prevent escalation of this conflict, its spread to other areas and other theaters. The United States has, and we will continue to respond to attacks by Iran's proxies to defend our personnel in the region, personnel who are here in Iraq and in Syria to help prevent the resurgence of ISIS. We will do what is necessary to deter and, as I said, respond to any attacks. Partners throughout the Middle East and beyond have a critical role to play in averting escalation, and that will be a major focus of my conversations throughout this trip. Second, we need to do more to protect Palestinian civilians. We've been clear that as Israel conducts its campaign to defeat Hamas, how it does so matters. It matters because it's the right and lawful thing to do. It matters because failure to do so plays into the hands of Hamas and other terror groups. There will be no partners for peace if they're consumed by humanitarian catastrophe and alienated by any perceived indifference to their plight. This is what binds us as human beings. I've seen images too of Palestinian children, young boys and girls, pulled from the wreckage of buildings. When I see that, when I look into their eyes through the TV screen, I see my own children. How can we not? Hamas doesn't care 1 second or 1 iota for the welfare, for the well-being of the Palestinian people. It cynically and...
They said this about PLO too in the 80s. We've been watching a lot of these 80s, the 1980s versions of this with Edward Said. And they said the exact same thing about the PLO. They don't care. The PLO doesn't care about the Palestinians. Hamas doesn't care about the Palestinians. We care about them when, you know, after this will happen, we'll care. It's just placating. It's just
monstrously
absolute propaganda.
uses them as human shields, putting its commanders and command posts, its weapons and ammunition, within or beneath residential buildings, schools, mosques, hospitals. But civilians should not suffer the consequences for its inhumanity and its brutality.
Zero proof.
We provided Israel advice that only the best of friends can offer on how to minimize civilian deaths while still achieving its objectives of finding and finishing Hamas terrorists and their infrastructure of violence. Today, I spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu and other senior officials about concrete steps to do that. President Biden has consistently stressed the need for Israel to operate according to international humanitarian law. I also emphasize that the protection of civilians must take place not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, where incitement and extremist violence against Palestinians must be stopped and perpetrators held accountable. Third, we need to substantially and immediately increase the sustained flow of humanitarian assistance into Gaza and getting American citizens and other foreign nationals out of Gaza. Since we reached agreement with Israel, Egypt, and the United Nations 2 weeks ago on mechanisms to enable humanitarian aid to begin.
Yeah, they mentioned the 35 Americans killed on October 7th, but what about the 400 Americans trapped in Gaza that are probably, several of them are missing, I'm sure, because we are still bombing where they are. We don't care about those 400 people as much as we care about the 35. Is that a thing? Again? Yes, it is.
In reaching civilians in need, we have scaled up deliveries. We've gone from 0 to now over 100 trucks going into Gaza through the Rafah crossing every day. But this is still not enough. I spoke to Israeli leaders about tangible steps that can be taken to increase the sustained delivery of food, water, medicine, fuel, and other essential needs, while putting in place measures to prevent diversion by Hamas and other terrorist groups. We've identified mechanisms to enable fuel to reach hospitals and other needs in the south. Israel has raised appropriate concerns that we share, about Hamas's hoarding and siphoning of fuel in northern Gaza. Again, its cynicism knows no bounds, denying fuel itself that it has to hospitals and other places that desperately need it. In meetings with regional partners, I'll continue conversations about getting assistance to flow, including with help from the United Nations. Over the last...
There hasn't been any proof that fuel has been adverted to rockets or anything. There's no proof of that. It's straight up Israel-American talking points. There's never been anything that have said that the fuel that goes in there does not go to generators. And if we maybe didn't hit their freaking generators right off the bat, they would have electricity. We wouldn't be worried about this if they didn't hit their one power plant.
Several days, U.S. citizens, foreign nationals, and critically wounded Palestinian civilians have begun to transit out of Gaza. We expect more to leave over the coming days. Even as these people are able to exit Gaza, we remain relentlessly focused on securing the release of hostages, including American citizens. We discussed these ongoing efforts today. Our Deputy Special Representative for Hostage Affairs, Steve Gillen, who came with me on my first visit a couple of weeks ago, has remained here on the ground to help bring our people home and also to work with their families. We believe that each of these efforts would be facilitated by humanitarian pauses, by arrangements on the ground that increase security for civilians and permit the more effective and sustained delivery of humanitarian assistance. That was an important area of discussion today with Israeli leaders. How, when, and where these can be implemented, what work needs to happen, and what understandings must be reached. Now, we recognize this would take time to prepare and coordinate as well with international partners. A number of legitimate questions were raised in our discussions today, including how to use any period of pause to maximize the flow of humanitarian assistance, how to connect a pause to the release of hostages, how to ensure that Hamas doesn't use these pauses or arrangements to its own advantage. These are issues that we need to tackle urgently, and we believe they can be solved. We've agreed to have our teams continue to discuss practical solutions. I've instructed our Special Envoy for Middle East Humanitarian Issues, David Satterfield, who's been doing remarkable work here over the last couple of weeks, to continue these discussions. Ultimately, we believe this can be a critical mechanism for protecting civilians while enabling Israel to achieve its objectives of defeating Hamas. Finally, and importantly, even as we work toward progress on each of these urgent needs, we're focused on setting the conditions for a durable and sustainable peace and security. The United States continues to believe that the best viable path, indeed the only path, is through a two-state solution. That's the only guarantor of a secure Jewish and democratic Israel, the only guarantor of Palestinians realizing their legitimate right to live in a state of their own, enjoying equal measures of security, freedom, opportunity, and dignity. The only way to end a cycle of violence once and for all. And it's precisely now, in the darkest moments, that we have to fight hardest to preserve a path of stability, of security, of opportunity, of integration, of prosperity, and of peace. Not tomorrow, not after the war, but today. Thank you.
First question goes to Leon Bruno with AFP.
Hi, Leon Bruno, Agence France Presse. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Secretary. You mentioned it in your opening speech, of course, and yesterday also you said that it was urgent or concrete measures needed to be taken to ease the fate of Palestinians, civilians. What assurances did the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu give you this morning in your talks? And also on the issue of humanitarian pauses that you say you have discussed, and I understand that you said you don't know where, how, and when, but could you give us a little bit more details on what you mean by that exactly? I mean, is it a stop bombings or what have you? Could you give us some details on that? And then last question very quickly. There was a strike yesterday on AFP's office in Gaza, where we have a continued live feed since the beginning of the conflict. Apparently a missile strike. There's serious damage to our office there. I'd like your thoughts on that, please.
Great, Leon, thank you very much. A few things in response. First, when it comes overall to humanitarian assistance, the Israeli government is committed to providing that assistance, or enabling that assistance, more accurately, to get to people in Gaza. And as I said, just over the last 2 weeks, we've gone from nothing getting in through the Rafah Gate to now, I think just today, over 100 trucks. And as I said, that's significant progress in the space of a couple of weeks, but it's also insufficient. And there's a recognition not only by us of that fact, but also by the Israeli government, as well as our Egyptian partners, as well as the United Nations. So we are looking at very concrete, practical ways to widen the aperture, to significantly increase the assistance that's getting in, the food, the medicine, the water, fuel, other critical needs for people who, through no fault of their own, are in desperate need. And we had a good conversation about that today. Again, Ambassador Satterfield, who's here, is working on this every single day. But I'm confident, based on the conversations we had, that you'll see a further increase in the assistance that's getting in to people who need it. With regard to humanitarian pauses, again, we see this as a way of further facilitating the ability to get assistance in, to make sure that the resources are in place as well to absorb the assistance coming in, to make sure that it gets to the people who need it. We see it as a way also, and very importantly, of creating a better environment in which hostages can be released. And this is a very important piece. So, as I mentioned already, and I won't repeat it, there are a number of very important practical questions that go along with this that we've agreed to discuss and work on. We've agreed that our teams will continue to talk about this in the days ahead. And from our perspective, this can be a critical way to advance many of the interests that I discussed earlier. I haven't seen the details about the strike, Leon, that you alluded to that hit.
They always push those off till later. They always push them off, pretend like they're not real there. We'll never answer it. We'll forget about it. And then, yeah.
The AFP office in Gaza. And let me just say and say again that as we stand strongly for Israel's right and obligation to defend itself, we also believe that it's vitally important how Israel does this, including with the highest regard for the protection of civilians. And that, of course, includes journalists who are doing extraordinary work under the most dangerous conditions to tell this story to the world, something that we deeply admire, deeply respect, and we want to make sure that they're protected.
The next question goes to Corinne Betzalel with Channel 12.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary Blinken, for being here. Two issues. Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, is talking right now. If following his speech or his remark, another front will open in the north, will the US actually use its firepower in the region, not only to deter, but also to destroy, target in Lebanon, or if needed in Iran? And on the hostages, the Biden administration is asking Israel for a temporary pause, and we understand it is not a ceasefire. But do you have any guarantees, any assurances that this temporary pause will lead to hostage release? And I know you have heard the family of the hostages today outside the Kiryat base. And if can you assure us that the United States will not hold Israel back before the main objective of this war will fulfill, which is eliminating Hamas?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me take the second question first. There are no guarantees about anything as a general proposition, and maybe even more specifically in the context of the fight against Hamas. But we are absolutely focused on getting hostages back and getting them back to their families in safety. And we believe that, among other things, a humanitarian pause could help that effort, could facilitate it. It's one of the reasons why we're focused on it. But regardless, our determination to get people back is manifested every single day in our efforts to do just that. And as I said, and said repeatedly, and as President Biden has said and said repeatedly, we stand strongly with and behind Israel in its right and obligation to defend itself, defend its people, and take the steps necessary to try to ensure that this never happens again. Nothing has changed, and that won't change. With regard to Lebanon, with regard to Hezbollah, with regard to Iran, we have been very clear from the outset that we're determined that there not be a second or third front opened in this conflict. President Biden said on day one to anyone
that anyone that's gonna even try to step into Israel, we will take precautions, we will step in, don't even think about it. What about the fact Israel has bombed in southern Syria, has bombed in northern Egypt, has bombed in fucking, where else have they bombed lately? Pretty sure Lebanon. I don't think they've gotten into Jordan yet, but that's sure to come. And yeah, and West Bank, I think there's been 280 people killed in West Bank. Hamas is not in West Bank, people. So yeah, the bombings are spreading from Israel's side, not from the other nations, you jackass.
thinking of opening a second front, taking advantage of the situation. Don't. And we backed up those words, not only with work that we've done with many partners in the region to reinforce that message, but with practical deeds, including the deployment of 2 aircraft carriers battle groups to the region, including with action that we've taken.
All right, I'm done with this jackass. Let's go on to this jackass. Let's
Good afternoon,
do it
everyone.
in the proper speed.
Tomorrow, the President and the First Lady will travel to Lewiston, Maine. While there, they will pay respects to the victims of the horrific shooting attack last week and grieve with the families and community members who have been affected by this senseless act of violence. The President will also meet with the brave first responders, dedicated nurses, and others on the front lines of the response. For the first time ever, instead of
No, we are not listening to him. Not at all. We came for Kareen. We came for Kareen. We don't listen to this guy. Oh my god, he's not gonna let Kareen speak? So sad.
phobia and related forms of hate. And the first order of business when we did that a year ago was to release a strategy on combating anti-Semitism. And I know all of you reported, so many of you reported on this. There was 100 actions that agencies were able to take to counter the scourge of anti-Semitism. And then the next step was developing to counter Islamophobia. And so that's what you're seeing, and that's what this is the president's commitment. He ran on this, as you all know, to restore the soul of this nation, to make sure that no hate sees the light of day, to continue to fight against that type of hatred, and that includes all types of hatred. That includes Islamophobia. That includes anti-Semitism. And this is an administration that's taken action not just the last couple of weeks or the last couple of months, but started this process back in December of last year. So I just wanted to make that super, super clear, and that's what that's been our approach here, the president's approach and this administration's approach.
On Tuvalu, does the White House believe that the Reed Cinema resolution is a way out of the blockade?
I mean, look, and we have said this, we're certainly not going to speak to the procedure of how the Senate operates. That is not for us to do, but we will continue to be crystal clear and very, very loud about what Tuberville is doing. It's just shameful. It is dangerous. It is shameful.
I like how the DOS runs their press briefings where they stay on subject and they don't let people bounce all over and go right from Israel to a Senate vote. Craziness.
I think the Admiral did a great job laying out how that's affecting some of our key critical service members, and we're talking about 380 service or positions that are at risk, or that no one knows where they're going to go. Right? No one knows what's happening, and we're talking about families too. That affects their families, and so this is not a way to keep our country safe. This is not a way to move forward with our national security, and it is shameful and it's dangerous. And we are very, very proud to see Republican senators speak up. As I did at the top, I laid out just direct quotes from them and how this is not how, especially in this time, what we're seeing around the world, this is not how we should move forward.
And then on the mayors, I guess there were a couple of mayors who came to the White House today to meet with officials on their problems with managing migrants. Just wondered if you can say anything about how the meeting went and what they talked about.
So a couple of things. They met with the White House Chief of Staff, Jeff Zients. They also met with Senior Advisor Tom Perez and other White House and DHS as well officials. DHS officials, obviously, who representatives from Chicago and Denver to discuss the joint effort to manage what they're dealing with migrants arriving in their city. And so this is something that we took very, very seriously. We talked about part of the conversation certainly was about the importance of the presidential supplemental funding request, which also includes support for communities and to continue our work to accelerate the process of work permits, as you've heard us speak from here many times, for eligible migrants. And so we're going to continue that partnership. We're going to continue to have those conversations. It was a constructive conversation, and this is not the first. There have been many others. And so look, we understand what they're going through. We understand what's going on the ground, and this is why we say that if Republicans truly care about border security, this is something, as we talked about the national security supplemental, we know that's included, then they can act.
Thank you. You just mentioned that representatives from Chicago and Denver were here. There was reporting that Mayor Adams from New York was on his way and then turned around. Do you have any more information about that? And also, did any other representative from New York join that meeting?
So I believe a staff from the mayor's office was in the room for this meeting. I cannot speak for the mayor's schedule. That is something that I would have to refer you to his office. But you saw the reports. I just can't speak to. Obviously, I can't speak to his schedule and why he could not attend.
And completely different. A government shutdown is about 2 weeks away. If something doesn't happen, what are your expectations there? The speaker today was talking about something called a laddered continuing resolution. What is the White House position on that concept?
I mean, look, we've been clear when we were here the last time, close to a government shutdown that thankfully was avoided. Look, they have 2 weeks. Congress has 2 weeks to do their jobs, as you just stated. They have 2 weeks to honor their word to avoid a shutdown. That's what they have to do. And the president said this when he signed the last continuing resolution. He said there's no excuse for another crisis. There really isn't. That's our message to them. There is no excuse for another crisis. They have to do their job, and they have to honor and avoid a shutdown.
Did the president sign a continuing resolution that has this laddered structure so that different agencies would have different expiration dates?
So look, what I will say is that they have to do their jobs. They have to make sure that they avoid a government shutdown. Not going to get ahead of whatever process they're going to move forward with. The president wants to see them.
Oh, just boringly repeat yourself. That is just perfect, Karine. I can't think of anything, so I'm going to repeat my talking point. Fantastic.
Avoid a government shutdown. And so we'll see. We'll see what they do. Let's see if they're able to do their jobs.
Was the White House concerned to see Senator Menendez attend a classified briefing on Ukraine yesterday, given that he's been accused of aiding a foreign government?
So look, and I've said this before, this is very serious. The investigations, we take them very seriously. I don't have anything to say about, to comment about the meeting that he attended, the classified meeting that he attended. Just not going to get into that from here, but obviously we take this very seriously.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on the Islamophobia question. With this initiative, are you going to be reviewing laws and regulations that are in place across the U.S. government that are targeted at Muslims and not just at the federal level, but also at the state and local level? Do you see some scope for those measures to be rescinded, and in what kind of time frame is that even possible?
So look, we're definitely going to. One thing I can say, we're going to continue to have conversations with community leaders, advocates, and members of Congress and others as we, move forward with the strategy. This is something that this entire administration takes very seriously, and make sure that every American has the freedom to live their lives. Certainly, we can get.
I guess her tell is she stutters a ton when she's lying, and she's making shit up, because she is just baffled and stuttering now.
We can get you more specifics on what this is going to, the strategy is going to look like, the breakdowns and the agencies that are going to be involved. And I can't speak to specifics of investigations or penalties of that nature. But this is the beginning of it, and certainly this is something, like I said, the first step of order of business was back in May when we released a strategy on combating anti-Semitism, and this is the next steps, and certainly we will have more to share as the days go by.
And on Maine, if I may, you said that this is, these visits are difficult for the president. Are you planning to, after this latest shooting, is there any action that you're planning in terms of maybe bringing people together again, local officials? We've said the incident, the tragedy in Maine did cause Representative Golden to change his view on an assault weapons ban. Are you seeing any other lawmakers come forward that might have changed their view? And will there be any kind of a summit or gathering?
There's a lot that you're asking in that question there, Andrea, and all very good questions. Look, one of the things that was so important for the office to be created, the office in preventing gun violence, obviously one of the I guess pillars to that office is making sure that all of the executive orders that the president put forward is accelerated, right? That we move really much faster on getting what the president signed out there to states and obviously to Americans who are suffering and just communities out there who are suffering, but also to make sure that the law that was the bipartisan law also gets moved out very quickly. But one of the things that we've been providing, and these are the things that we'll continue to provide to communities, is, as I mentioned, Greg Jackson is on the ground. He's working with FBI and DOJ to coordinate with victim services, deploying experts from the newly created Mass Shooting Victimization Resource Center. That's something that we're doing. We're coordinating with the Department of Education and HUD to support school reopening strategy, because that was obviously really important as the schools had to shut down and emergency housing as needed throughout the region. So there are a lot of steps that we're doing that is part of this office that's going to help the community on the ground. As it relates to Congress, look, we've been very clear. The president has done taken more than 2 dozen executive actions to deal with gun violence. We believe there is more. This cannot be what we're seeing in Maine and other places, cannot be the norm, right? And so we've been very clear that more needs to be done. We've been very clear on that, and we've asked Congress to take legislative action in order to truly deal. If they want to save lives, that's what they need to do. They need to pass an assault weapons ban, enact universal background checks, require safe storage of guns and immunity from liability for gun manufacturers, and across the country we must adopt, strengthen the red.
She kept slamming her finger, but it was the same finger. We need to do this. We need to do this. We need to do this. Does that mean she's only going to get one thing done?
And so, and that is something that we see the Department of Justice taking action and creating a model red flag legislation so that other states can move forward. So there's a lot of work to be done here, a lot of work. And it started here with the 2 dozen executive action. Obviously, there was a bipartisan.
And then we'll get one thing done. We'll actually get one thing done. The 2 dozen executive actions mean nothing. That's just fingerprints.
Piece of legislation that's now
Just
law
saying
that
you did
was signed
something,
last year.
just
Now we need more
fingerprints on
legislation.
top.
That's what we need to really truly save lives.
The governor.
Maybe to the non-Andreas in the room, I'm just asking.
The governor has started an investigation now into mistakes. Is the federal government able to provide any assistance in that? Are you troubled by the reports that we've heard that so many clues were missed? And there was a call this morning about $334 million going into community policing and things like mental health of police forces and things like that. Is there any funding that you're thinking about making available to help local law enforcement do better in terms of identifying potential shooters?
So the commission to probe that the governor announced, we believe, of course, that the community needs answers. And so this is going to be something, obviously, that we support. And the president has told the governor, since that strategy unfolded, that Maine has its full backing from the entire federal family and will provide resources. And obviously, the Department of Justice and the FBI is on hand to assist in any way. And don't want to, they're still investigating. As you know, you just mentioned, we're hearing things, but obviously law enforcement is still investigating. Don't want to get ahead of that. But we are here to offer resources, and of course, we support the governor's efforts to get to the bottom of what occurred around this horrific tragedy. Karen, you know the answer.
Thanks, great. Back on the mayors, you mentioned the supplemental funding request that you guys have sent up to Congress, but they say that $1.4 billion isn't enough to help them deal with the influx of migrants. They're asking for $5 billion. Would the administration consider boosting that amount? And what was the response from those senior officials in that meeting to the request for $5 billion?
So look, we have been in constant conversation and communication, obviously, with these city mayors and others across the country as they're certainly dealing with the influx of migrants in their city. I'm not going to get into specifics of what came out. What I know was what was wanted to agenda on to discuss, and what we believe was important is that supplemental. We do need that 1.4 billion. That's what we believe is needed. It's emergency, as you know, emergency funding that we put forward in the supplemental. That we believe it's important for our national security. It's important for what we're trying to do with these communities. I can't speak to the $5 billion. I'm not sure what else they're asking on top of the 1.4 billion, so I can't speak to that. I can only speak to what we have requested in the supplemental funding to Congress, and that's what we believe is urgent, is needed. And we have said, we've been very clear. If House Republicans are serious in dealing with this border security, this is something that they should move forward with easily. But what we've seen them do over and over again.
She does a quality job at not saying a thing. She does a really good job of not saying anything. I mean, we could just watch Karine talk over her and just watch her get frustrated, and just look for her to get frustrated, and then finally, listen to her, because she is pretty easy to read. But man, she does not say a fucking thing at all. For an hour and 2 minutes.
Ever since I tried Hidden Valley Ranch, I finally found what I've been looking for.
Mm-hmm. But, there we go. But, this looked interesting, and I need a smoke.